I don't want to, sorry, like bust you too hard on the site because I know you just got to that. I think it's when you're zooming out and out and out though, you tend to like start to spread these things out like a field condition. And I think bust you too hard on the site. I think another step after midterm would be to go actually reverse backwards if you can, go back in a little bit and try to work between like the circulation and the organization and the pods, because right now they seem it's like it almost feels like a field condition where they're going, but then there's such a this like harsh distinction between what you care about designing, like the pod and the classroom and all that stuff. I mean, I can tell like you put a ton of work into that part and like the overhead shading structure, and then the circulation becomes this kind of like leftover space in between, and it's even just like real rough on how you approach it. I don't know exactly what the solution is, but I would like to not see as much of a like distinction between the two now. It feels like the pods are just kind of these separate things, and it probably doesn't help that the site is really tough and you're just all up on these plinths and stuff right now. So if you have like time to work on the site more, I try to go back in and work locally in between the pods and then in between the circulation and the pods.
Second home a reference for
They've seen the the case study.
Yeah, because like there's you and like the group before, it's very second home.
That relationship to the outdoors. We promoted the relationship to nature for all the students.
Also regarding like the scale, I love that moment where it was like coming from the iPad. It made me laugh. Sorry, I didn't like I didn't mean it like but I think that you could have like in the final video, like when you actually have time to think about it a little bit more, it's not just like showing. Maybe you kind of approach like seeing the classroom from like the other side of the screen when you're like coming out of the iPad. So like thinking about how if someone weren't here, how would they be perceiving the space from the other point of view? Maybe take that as like a kind of like a storytelling moment of like how this relates to like the greater context of like an accessible education.
Animation was great.
Yeah, it's a lot of work for midterm.
The mixture, the animation is the first 1 minute is animated content. So, but we hadn't had time to animate all so mostly it's like images, yeah. But they have a half a semester to develop it. Excellent. Any more comments from the people on the grid? On the Zoom grid?
No, I mean, I guess, I was thinking about the color a lot, which I feel like wasn't addressed very much. But, if you're working with, I'm just kind of curious about materiality and color here, if whether or not this is a topic that will be touched on in a studio like this. I'm not sure if it says my internet's not stable. I'm just thinking, given the space between the let's say archipelago, right? I can totally imagine that the spaces between the islands would be layered in elevation. And so whatever this materiality is, whether it's reflective or not reflective, I think the lighting condition between the layers could be a really interesting thing to also capture later when you produce more perspective.
I think to the point of materiality, as we move on, Jimenez, that's something that we are also using Cinema 4D to really challenge the materials. This is why it's like animation-based texture. And so I think the students, as they develop more the project, they're going to engage a lot more into not how this thing is built. It's not true materials, but really what is my materiality on my project different than, maybe the other projects. What makes it unique?
Sorry, a minute. But go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think even atmospherically, that's all. Eric.
I was just, I kept thinking there's something that these pods of these kind of little clusters are reminding me of, and it's I finally figured it out. It's at the LA Zoo there, and they've even got the kind of rope netting above some of them, so that the classrooms here would be the exhibits where you can look at the monkeys or the birds, and the people observing are standing under the what's here the netted kind of like courtyard cluster. So this is a typology I recognize, but kind of funny to think of the relationship between that program and this one.
Great.
Yeah.
Cedric first.
Yes, here Martin says that express idea. Okay, thank you
Thank
guys.
you.
Thank you so much. And we are going to have our next team, which is again here and there. Felix over there in your red. Hi, Felix.
Hi everyone.
And Trey here. Trey, maybe you want to expand a bit the grid because we don't see Felix in that red. Make it into the double. There it is. Yes. Hi, Felix.
Hi everyone.
Felix, can you hear us well?
Yeah, I'm running into the same issue that Corey was running into where the audio is kind of in and out for the critics. But it's better than it was before.
Okay, we move the speaker closer, and the critics will be like, maybe yeah. Well, we have to do social distancing also, so we have some concern.
Yeah, I get the issue.
Jack's saying something about. Leave it green.
You maybe you,
Do you want to do it?
those two.
I don't want to ruin it. By-
Okay.
It'll pick up a wider radius now.
So let's see if it works better now.
Does that sound any better?
Yeah, it sounds clear. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Trey. It's good to see everybody. So for our project, Sinuosity, we are proposing a decentralized approach to early learning that reimagines educational spaces as a series of sinuous and irregular systems. What?
Oh.
I can put it full screen, but within our modified TONET chair designs, we aimed to use the three-dimensional line as a framework for containing and juxtaposing sweeping volumes and materialities. The array of contrasting sensory materials within the framework of these chairs are further explored as irregular staggering volumes of the classrooms, which create micro-programs within the organization of the space.
Distributing the designated programs into this framework allows the space to deviate from the typical classroom, which celebrates a clear delineation between spaces for the teacher and the students. Instead, we meld these distinct areas into one another and use the flowing lines within the space as a bridge between programmatic function, circulation, and materiality. This specific classroom configuration serves as an incubator for early learning within the elementary school design.
The flowing lines that define the staggered volumes within the incubators flow vertically to create distinct, opaque, transparent, and open enclosures. When the same methodology is implemented at the scale of the cluster, these incubators begin to blend together sinuously through the courtyard and parterres, encouraging exploratory meandering through the site.
Considering the school design on the site adjacent to Diamond Ranch High School, we began by designing an expressive sprawling figure which spills out from the constrained inner circulation corridor of the high school. This spillage expands across the site and is broken by the array of incubator clusters within the interior of the plan organization, and contained by the larger perimeter volumes of upper level classrooms and other larger programs within the school. These larger volumes of contrasting soft sweeps and harder platonic shells are bounded by the TONET-like lines that seep back into the landscape. Ultimately, the notion of sinuosity becomes integral not only to the exchange of knowledge or ideas within the elementary school, but also to the teeming fabric of educational spaces and meandering landscape that formally fuse themselves into the site. And so, yeah, those lower levels show the site plan and a perspective view from that inner street outward, seeing that kind of sprawl coming out of that inner corridor.
You guys want me to stop on something?
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys have done a really good job at translating the sort of formal qualities you both have developed with your chairs into your project. I think so far this is like, to me, I find one of the stronger projects that we've seen in terms of the form. I'm really into the colors and the tones that you guys are using with this. Like, there's something very like candy like almost about it that I'm finding really like exactly right. Like there's something really like intriguing about the sort of materials, right? I'm like wondering what that stuff feels like in real life. Yeah, I think this project in particular, I'm really curious to see what this is going to look like in section. The way you guys are sort of talking about the sort of vertical stacking that you're developing in terms of classroom organization, circulation, and things like that. I think really communicating how you guys are organizing the space through your section drawings moving forward is going to be super helpful. I will say I do wish the sort of canopy system you've got going on maybe starts to get a bit denser. I think like towards the sort of top end there, it feels like it's sort of lacking a bit. I would want to see that same kind of formal excess make its way into that as well. Yeah, really good.
Yeah, I was gonna say, what's next for you guys? You're pretty much done. But I second some of Ben's comments about the kind of weaving or intertwining that you're doing with the piping system. There's a moment where it kind of loses the same style that you guys have in the flow. It starts to become more repetitive and almost like the veins on the leaf or something. But I don't feel like that's your style. I think you're doing a lot more in that right now at the very bottom of your campus and kind of intertwining of the pipes. I think you guys did an amazing job with the sinuosity of not just the flow of the form, but also the colors and the materiality. And I think those things are really strong right now. I honestly don't know what else you guys are going to work on, but I think
there's always something.
there's always something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll find something.
We'll find something like door handles, like
I think the section is a good next step though, because it feels like right now almost like, like rice feels like stepping off the side. Like it feels like it wants to do that with all of these little areas, but then it kind of also seems kind of flat at the same time. So I don't know if that's just excess, like what the reason for all the extra, like this type of green versus this type of green is. But I think maybe a little bit better in what the uses of those spaces are in the section. I think we can do more of the section. It looks like on the edge where it gets really steep, it just kind of like drops off a huge retaining wall or something. But I think the section, because you already have pieces there, you just need to kind of move them up and down and add steps, stuff like that, to make it give a little bit more human scale to it. Right now it's a little big. It's hard for me to talk about these kind of projects because I can't do that. But I think it's really beautiful and actually integrated really well with the existing site, existing school actually.
Do you mind going to the part of your video where you have like that chunk off? It's like not the whole thing. There's like, I think maybe when you jump to the larger scale, I think it loses some of the kind of, like this piece here, you're kind of like bringing the scale smaller as it goes into the classrooms. Like when you bring the canopies in, it like adds more and more articulation. And I think that you kind of lose that at the larger scale. Because like there's that moment where, it's connecting to the existing building where there's the big swirls that come out. And I think that maybe you can kind of choreograph those swirls a little bit better to kind of create like these chunks that like change in scale. I think when it goes to the larger scale, it all becomes very flat, like it's all the same. So I think that maybe you can start to articulate and change the scale of those surfaces and maybe even the materiality to bring more of that language back in that's in that smaller chunk, which I think, I mean, you probably just had more time to work at the smaller scale, but I think you can bring a lot more of that in the future.
Quick thing I'm noticing as well is just maybe sort of developing a classroom a bit more. I know you guys touched on the sort of open classroom, but I think in your renderings, it's not clear which one of those is meant to be the sort of learning space or how that's supposed to be used. So I think maybe developing a bit more clarity in how that space is used in particular is going to be helpful as well.
We do have specific areas, but we didn't include it in the presentation because that's not what we would have. We do have like specific.
Yeah.
We can go into that.
Yeah.
Felix, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so for the breakdown of this classroom, we imagine this as being a classroom more for like primary learning. So like first and second grade, where the majority of programs are all kind of integrated within one single classroom, as opposed to having like departing into different zones within the school. So on that top, let me get on the mirror, on this top area where we have this screen, we imagine that area being more of like a work area or like a lecture where the teacher can kind of discuss with the students, and there's kind of a step down between the two to have a bit more physical engagement within that site, within that area of the classroom. On the upper left portion, we imagine this being the art area where it has moments for kind of stand-up easel painting, as well as like sculptures, spinning wheels, a craft table, and then just a general work painting table. And then on the lower bottom left, having a reading area that's has an area for the teacher to actually read to the students, to read to the students, but also just in general area which is made up of these very soft and plush materials and kind of bookshelves integrated within those moments as kind of a general reading area for that for the students. And then near the entrance, just like a small platform where the teacher can reside, but it's completely open and essentially allowing for a free flow between all the different elements of the classroom. And then on the right, having kind of a lounge area for the students that is open out.
They have sort of all the details. So,
And we're joined by Anna Niemark, who's teaching a vertical studio at SCI-Arc this semester and is
One
also
more guest.
principal of First Office.
any
I
further
have a question.
or great?
Did you guys look at the National Schools of Art in Cuba as a precedent in the studio?
No, but I know what you're referring to. Yes.
Okay, yeah, because I can
Yeah.
see that you guys have some continuity with that, and I think there's a good place to look for. I mean, there was very explicit ideology that was being attached to the sinuous spaces of education, and a kind of famous example. So I think, in a way that maybe actually has visual kind of echoes with what you're doing here. So I think like that kind of linking of the ideology to the spaces, that might be a fun one to elaborate more in the remaining time for the studio.
All right, which project? We couldn't hear you. I couldn't hear you.
The National Schools of Art in Cuba.
In Cuba, in Havana. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's a great example.
Yeah.
Really good. So I'm going to put a note here, post it.
I've actually been there. It's amazing.
Yeah?
Yeah. You can walk on the roof.
Yes.
Like one last like random note, I loved how you were bringing in like the real world materials, like the wood, like the really chocolatey wood, and I think that you could do that more, like even like keep the color, but I think that you can start to add like like bumps and like imperfections that kind of give that like real world look, and I think that would make that just like take it to the next level.
You can help with the landscaping stuff too, because right now it's like this like digital bright green that just slices off, integrate that up. So
And you guys look like you know how to do it, so thanks for giving that.
But don't take it apart, you know, you guys, we still have half a semester, okay? So keep on developing everything.
I think also like the classroom, since you guys are starting like the small scale and the big scale, like I haven't seen any views of like inside one from anyone. So I find that kind of interesting. So maybe like incorporate that in the video in the future. I know interior stuff is like impossible, which is probably what that's for. Yeah.
I mean, there's so many renders they've developed. We focus on a few to show some stuff, but it's true. We try to focus on this axis, you know, going from this like the powers of 10. And so many of the drawings are trying to escalate that and develop. So this view comes in the grid below, but sometimes it's not in the movie. But yes, they've developed, as you can see, this 3D. Yet that's where we're entering now.
For the final, I think we'd like to explore that.
Yeah. Okay.
In your case, I would say your group in particular really took on the starting point with the Tonette chair and actually worked that through on a multitude of scales. And I really appreciate the way you've also managed to then integrate other formal logics into that, because sometimes it's hard to break away, like the curve is dictating a lot of the circulation, but in particular what you start to do with the canopy, you begin to deviate from that a little bit and use that as something to stitch together the different formal logics. I think it's really beautifully done, really exquisite.
Excellent. So one last comment I would say on regard to materiality that Natu, you were saying that is closer to candy. I think it has something that is closer to, you know, like, I don't know, kind of more flesh, like I'm just looking back at your own thesis from some time ago. You know, I think you should look at her thesis, the materials that you used to create the housing, you know, that were in between real and fake, you know, I mean, they were fake, but still, you know, like they took on qualities. I think that you have to, you know, in regards to the details, I think you have to advance more the materiality. Maybe
if I can,
some images of that would be great.
If I can just quickly fit one more comment, I think that the flesh comment is fantastic because within that comment, there's something about tension and compression that we can maybe begin to think about. The tautness that you know, pushes down the flesh creates these kinds of cuts because of precisely because of the tensile quality of the material itself.
Mm-hmm.
The School of Art in Cuba that was just mentioned by Eric. I think, you know, it's really worth thinking about what types of material effects you're trying to create, and especially if these members are there holding down something else to do this. And one very last comment, I think, you know, in addition to the super excellent reference that Eric put forth, I also was thinking a lot about Roberto Burle Marx. Roberto Burle Marx is, he was a landscape architect in Brazil. And I think graphically, there's something about the spaces between the curves that you can really maybe get a lot out of by reading both his work, but also his paintings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we took a look at that early on, especially with the parterres as just like a reference point for having a more graphic landscape.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Felix.
Thank you.
Thank you, Felix. You guys, the audio, are we doing better with the audio here?
Yeah, the audio sounds better. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Jack, for remembering that.
So Zarina and Alwan are next.
Right.
Should I share my screen?
I think you guys can. Wait, Serena, do you want to share screen? Because we have here he can.
Yeah, that'd be good.
You see, see how it's set up? Sarina, is that we have a computer that it's like that's a computer rather than, so he's navigating. Sarina?
Oh, yeah.
You were, I thought that you were frozen. Sarina, please let us know if you don't hear or any technical issues, okay, please?
All right.
Did you want to start with the animation or the renders?
We'll start talking as we.
Okay. Oops.
Serena, you want to start off?
Yeah. So first, I want to tell you about like the idea of our school. So basically, our school teaches students how to respect the environment by allowing them to design and construct their own learning spaces. We imagined a new creative learning institution where students design their own chairs and classrooms tailored to their preferences. The chairs are passed down to the next generation of pupils, and they add their own twist to it by adding more components or modifying them. This teaches students about the power of community and the concept of upcycling.
So, as the title of our project suggests, the main focus of our
Just louder.
Yeah.
so the main focus of our project is on the detail.
One more time.
As the title of the project suggests, the main focus of our project is the detail. So instead of having a grand architectural form governing the whole site, we start from building detail. So we start fitting smaller donut curves into the bigger curves, and we add and expand, and that way it informs the spatial quality of the campus. And in context of the Power of 10 theme of the studio, it works really well because as you zoom in to the scene, those smaller curves become those classrooms, even furnitures or small objects. And the bigger curves take care of the landscaping and the circulation. So for example, some of the curves of the chair shape the walkway around the site. And another example is the legs from our chair design scale up to support the whole classroom floors with the varying height.
We have some sounds, some models going by.
Serena, can you hear okay?
Yeah, there's a lot of noise though.
You
But
want
I
to make
can-
sure you can hear all the feedback.
Yeah, because there was something passing by.
Do you mind just replaying the video?
Maybe you can zoom in a little bit on it. Like,
Yeah.
One thing to note as well, we were also really inspired by the landscape and our actual site. So for example, our curves are stacked up on each other, and they extrude away in like different magnitudes. And by doing this, the school naturally blends in with the slope that's already on the site, and it creates a nice terracing effect. We were also fascinated by the first impression of the bird's eye view of the site because of its very distinct texture patterns that it contains. The site contains a residential grid, a mountain, sports field, and vegetation patches scattered throughout, and also has a road cutting through it. We decided to have some of the classroom floors have translucent material like you can see here, which allows different landscape themes of the classrooms to show up beneath it. from the top, the campus is almost a smaller version of the whole site in terms of the varying textures.
You know, I was kind of like interested in the very beginning when you were talking about, like, you were the first person to talk about what your school actually is for, and I think that has, like, you were talking about like this modification or like this upgrade culture of the school, and I think that if you're gonna take that approach, I think that that needs to come at all scales. So I like the kind of like predefined, you know, perfect curves that you guys have, I don't think necessarily lines up with that idea, but I think it's a really good idea. So like maybe you kind of speculate, like maybe the curves are unfinished, and then in part of your video, like they kind of build, and like as the school grows, like you're kind of speculating how this thing changes over time rather than kind of this like perfect version. But I really love that like the chair, like the students can modify the chair. Like maybe you show the chair at 3 different stages, like first year, 5 years from now, and then 20 years from now. Like what does it look like? Like what is the kind of rustification of that thing? Like, you know, what kind of modifications do they need in the future versus what they need now? And I think that's really worth exploring, and I really think that's a great idea.
Sort of becomes like a live representation of a project pipeline.
Yeah.
So the idea about the school pedagogy and the relationship with the design is that the beauty of this design is that you can theoretically infinitely keep adding more details onto details, and that's why we thought it could go well with our school, because students can literally build more curves and then add more surfaces and expand.
Right, that's what he's saying, right? It's like to communicate that more clearly. I think in your animation, you should actually show that transformation happening, right? So it's not something you're sort of verbally telling us. It's something we're actually seeing happen on the screen. I think this idea of upcycling is really, really interesting and sort of really current. I'd like to see that sort of come through in the materials you've chosen for your project. They don't really make sense right now for me, given your sort of concept. You know, I think you can maybe start to look at sort of composite materials, how you can start to maybe duplicate those same textures in your renderings and things like that. And again, think more about the sort of life cycle of the building itself, right? You know, are those materials like switched out everyone? Like, are they switched out eventually? How are they sort of expanded upon? How do those materials change over time? You know, maybe sort of taking this in a more sort of speculative direction, I think would be helpful for you guys.
Your project is really whimsical, and I think some of like the childlike concepts that you were talking about at the beginning really come through in kind of come through and really play up on this.
I think we lost audio a bit, Florencia.
Yeah, can you hear now?
Yeah.
I moved the speaker and I did unplug it, so my fault.
I'm not sure how much of that you heard.
I
Sorry.
think it was like just 1 minute.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
No, I just to go back on the idea of this project being whimsical, I want you guys to start to treat the landscape in kind of a similar manner where you're maybe even starting to peel off some of these swirls and kind of take away from this flatness and this one line that's happening at like the medium level, and sort of lift and play on the line even more as it starts to create maybe more holes and more elements of porosity in the mass itself.
I think going off that though, like going back to like what me and Nancy were saying, like I think that your school is really about designing the framework. And then once you design the framework, you can represent it in different ways. So you can build, like you can kind of use that language that you're using in your chairs as the framework. And then as you start to represent it and speculate it over time in terms of that upcycling, that upgrading, that you're using that framework to extend the design. So you're not really designing 3 different things, you're designing one thing that's represented in multiple different ways. I think would be really, really.
Yeah, I think you guys might also benefit from maybe more of like a modular system like you saw earlier, right? If the idea is that this is something that's meant to be sort of expandable, like what is that sort of unit of expansion, right? Like, is it expanding by like classroom? Is it 3 classrooms at a time? You know, think more about that process. I think is going to be helpful.
One thing is that this, I think I would engage more these 2 bars. One of these loops, Karina, maybe you don't see, but what I'm saying is, I'm going to sketch it, sorry. To sketch it in. I think that I would also add a loop to the existing building. I don't think that you should feel like, oh, this is precious. I mean, it's a proposal. But I would engage with that fee. And I've seen it in a few projects. The surrender, Felix and Trey, but also it's this bar is stuff. So I think that you guys can do stuff to it. This is for all the students. You can cover it, you can take a portion of it. I think that you can work on it.
I think my favorite moment, I mean, to Florencia's point, my favorite moment is where one of the new buildings makes an indentation in the ground plane of the field. There's a kind of return at the kind of urban scale. And I have a feeling that a little bit more, I think Zarina was speaking a little bit about it, that you're thinking about the existing condition and actually building your figures of the proportions or the rhythms of the existing parts. And so it seems to me like a really nice opportunity to just kind of continue to play the concave and convex geometries back and forth with one another, and actually kind of influence a little bit that edge of the existing infrastructure. You started doing that, so I think just to amplify that a little bit further would be amazing.
I think also I would just add that the way in which the coiling form that you took from the tonneau chair and the way in which it starts to uncoil, you could really modulate that in terms of the ideas about the changing classroom over time, and the way maybe like the chair workshops where students are going to be designing, I don't know if I can hear, that you could modulate that curvature more to accommodate the different scale of spaces. Because I know right now this was the first pass, and so it's almost like duplicates of them. They are like completely modular. But I think now after midterm, it'd be great to go in and really start to like customize, so you have three very different experiences.
I was just talking to Natu, like kind of like not to bring it back to nature too much, but like it reminds me of like a fern, like when it uncoils and like comes back in. Like maybe you can look at that a little bit.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Okay, so next Vigia. There she comes.
So we have 6.
Yeah, what that is. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Thank you, Vigia.
It's a high chair. Really loud.
Really loudly, yeah. Okay. Sorry.
So in my classroom, in this stage, the reference is one of my chair, and the chair can move.
Not too much instead of the, yeah.
The chair
Instead of the string, he can
chair can move on the tray, and this is how I combine different platform with different conditions together, and the tricks can activate the atmosphere here, and this is moved to the next stage when it showed how to combine three of my classroom together. And in this stage, the reference will be a platform for facility use. And at this stage, I add my shell on it to the main roof of my classroom area. And I make the line on it to mark the space and the size of this stage work. And in this way, it's combined with the whole compass. And yeah, I add some new shading on it. So it also acts as a visual exercise to combine different three parts of my compass. And our site has a very big slope, so it is possible to make some vertical division, use this slope, and I create some different rooms for facility use. And this can show how the vegetation acts also as a symbol of protection, for it is a very open area. Okay.
So I would sit in that chair so they can see you over there. Okay.
I think I lost one of my chair image.
Zoom in. Sometimes it gets lost. Okay. Sometimes you have to zoom in, and it's still there. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just mirror gets like.
So I designed three types of my chair, and they are like in the same family, have the same color and the material, and I also export this material and the curved lines, the element into my classroom. These are two main skin of my classroom area. This is the size I marked in my video. It's combined by three of my classroom monomer. Okay, so this is a top view. I separate my compass to three parts, and they can locate near the road and combine with my shading roof. It shows the multi-level rotation deviation in there. Thank you.
Are you done?
Yeah, I'm finished. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia.
I really appreciate the sequence of the animations. Really well done, really well put together.
Thank you.
Yeah, humans.
Okay.
Can you tell us a little bit more about this chair on a track? Like, what is that about?
Yeah,
Like this piece?
Because I have.
Do they sit in the chair and ride it throughout the school?
Yeah, you can sit on it.
No liabilities there.
So I have a different platform. They have a clear geometry division. So I want this track to activity, like they can combine this platform together, and this will be a symbol of one classroom like this.
Something super playful about it reminds me of those the toys for small children that have like the sort of loops, and there's like beads and things like that you kind of push around. It's an intriguing idea, I think. Like, I'd be maybe thinking about adding like a strap or something for safety measures, but I like that sort of concept. I don't know if you mentioned it, but I'm really intrigued by these like transparent domes you have. Like, what are those? Are those supposed to be the classroom spaces? What's happening sort of within them?
The transparent roof, like they are the shading of many indoor area, because the California climate. So I don't want to make a very exact indoor area. So yes, they act as an open roof, and in the top view, we can also see the texture and the geometry under it. So they are translucent. Yeah.
Okay, those are over the classroom spaces, though, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you have like this really interesting like fabric language going on, like very Issei Miyake like, especially like with the pleats and like the frills on the outside. I'm not really sure how that translates from the chair to that, but I mean I think it's working. So I think maybe just do it more. Especially like in terms of the landscape and stuff, maybe it starts to, undulate a little bit more differently.
Yeah.
But I think also like in terms of the track, like I don't see that in the larger scale. Like when you zoom in, I'm not seeing the roller coaster of chairs like from up here. But maybe it's like, the kids like get in, they strap in, and then like they go to school. Like they don't have to get out of the chair. Like I don't know if that's a good thing, but
At that point, I think maybe it could be interesting if you were to take that and sort of scale it up, and maybe it's not the chairs so much that are on a track, but the classrooms themselves. And so like the rooms might sort of move on a campus or something like that.
Like you can, like they move the grass on a stadium.
Exactly,
Yeah.
right? Like maybe it's this sort of like carousel kind of school or something. Like your classroom starts on one side in the morning, and then by the end of the day, it's sort of moved around, and you might be, on the other end, or back where you started. I think that sort of whatever that track would be is definitely up to you, but I think that would be something interesting to add to this.
I think one of the first things that pops in my mind is that this could be like a sensory experience through these classrooms, right? You have a different play of all these materials from exterior to interior. And this roller coaster effect that you have going through each classroom. And just imagine going from classroom A to classroom B, right? What is that sensory experience? Like, I haven't heard anybody talk about this yet, but what is the acoustics in each of these spaces? When you're outside, when you're inside. And I think you have an opportunity based on the materials that you proposed so far that you can explore that aspect within your project.
What does a bright red for a classroom do instead of like purple and like muted colors? There's surely a kind of experiential quality for kids. And thinking specifically about my 2.5-year-old, she is super high energy. So I'm wondering what red and orange does for things like that. I think the track is also something really interesting because these projects seem like so specific in their like formal qualities and colors and stuff, but then there's like this also this kind of flexibility to it. So I'm wondering like what the line is between the flexibility and the super specific. And maybe the track is like something that happens after hours, that could actually rearrange and change because these feel like they're puzzle pieces fitting together anyways. And just in general, I want to recognize like the amount of excess in these projects to like push a certain aesthetic. Not to get like too pragmatic, but it just seems like there's a lot of spaces that are just there to push a certain aesthetic only.
And so I think like for me at least, going like to the final thing, it'd be nice to see a little bit more like realism to it, like how you actually occupy some of these spaces, as opposed to just having hundreds of just like random little spaces that I don't think kids can really get to. Like that's a great space right there that you just pointed out, Chris, because that could be like something actually, but the ones that are like leaning off the edge and stuff like that, if they're there only to like push this certain kind of aesthetic agenda, I just want you to like recognize that and, you know, own it, because it certainly is there in my mind. But I don't know, some more realism, I think. Maybe that's not Chris.
As you get deeper into programs too, I think that will help. Like school's not just classrooms. Like there's administration spaces, there's, you know, gyms, there's playgrounds, you know, all that kind of stuff. So I think you can start to incorporate that too.
There'll be a plan and a section.
No.
Okay. No, okay. But just still like recognizing the fact that you're pushing a certain kind of excess here in these projects.
But they will have all the programs drawn in 3D. So when you cut through your animation in the powers of 10, you're going to cut through those other programs.
We saw like some plans earlier that were in the free.
Okay, so they'll develop the plan without having a line drawing, let's say.
So just going back to like the hierarchy of spaces, I think it helps a lot, because you can see the buildings over to the side, you see like different programs and sizes, and there's like bar buildings that are obviously like classrooms with like a double corridor, stuff like that helps, I don't know, ground it a bit more.
I think that's a good point too about like at what moment are these things architectural or maybe landscape elements or things that kind of start to create a dialogue between architecture and landscape. You know, I think, and I just want to commend you as well, because I know as you noticed, so we have some groups of 3, we have some groups of 2, and we have some students working alone. And I think you've done a remarkable project for you know, for working on this alone. That's great.
Yeah, I mean, Tricia, you are doing fantastic. So, and that'll be all my comments. More later, but yeah, a good job. And the model, I don't know if you guys got to see it with the detail and, you know, how you took on the line. I don't know if Senatu or Sean, you guys said to use the tracking system to move to the larger scale. The buildings move or the lines move, or maybe you can find other programs that move, you know, cards with like food cards. You know, I mean,
Or
I don't
even
know.
like
I mean,
the library, like if
yeah, or
students,
like
the
books.
books get distributed, and then after hours, maybe these cards come around and collect.
You know,
like
we have
robotic
those
cards.
pedestals are in those little tracks. So, you know, like there could be other things that are quite playful for the kids. You know, the kind of the toy track, yeah, the book, you know, their lunch, snacks. So I think that you can think outside of the box with how the track system gives you ideas about education and the environment and the space of, you know, plants, you know, gardening class, come the pots in a track, and then they go away again. Oh, yeah.
This is kind of a note for everyone, but like one thing that I haven't heard anyone talk about yet is like how they sit in the chair. Like because yours is very like high.
Yeah.
And then some people's were very like loungy and kind of bed-like, you know, like yeah, it's kind of like, are they falling asleep? Are they really attentive? Like what's the kind of like learning environment that chair is lending itself to? Yeah. So like as it relates to the body, I think is also kind of really important, since, you know, the chair is like, architect obsessed over chairs. So, you know, it's like, I think it's worth interjecting it into the conversation a little bit at the beginning. But I know that's like something to think about. But.
Thank you, Tricia. Okay, excellent. So we'll have our next group.
Wendy and Paul and Sue.
Wendy. Oh, so it's 3, yeah.
Right, so they should go to the chair exhibit.
They have to go to Play Lab to go see the chair exhibit. Right up. So Play Lab, their office is on Santa Fe. They had a chair exhibition.
It's just all chairs.
Open last night.
New chairs, older chairs.
No, so they like asked a bunch of artists, designers to make the chair of some kind. And so it's a bunch of different chairs just in this space. Yeah, just open last night. I think it should be open for a couple more days.
He told me that I have to move the camera.
Can you see it? Should we move?
Yes. Are you fine? Uh-huh.
Just set it on fire. Start.
Okay, and please, you'll have to speak, really project. Okay. Everyone can hear and there and in here.
So our project for the new Diamond Ranch Elementary School responds to the effects of increasing air friction in the California, scarcity of water, overuse of natural resources, and the isolation of plants from the building. The school is designed to promote a reflection on the relationship between people and nature. Also, we have some questions to be think. Do we need an air conditioning system? Do we need artificial light source during the day? And what role does the water cycle play in the natural environment? And what is the relationship between plants and architecture? And those are, we think, that architecture should create a connection rather than a separation between people and the natural. So we try to blur the boundary between them. So our site and the building are quietly located between the land and the mountain, and the campus has a strong sculpture quality. The free and organic form also saves the adaptable indoor space, and the indoor space composed of walls, floor, ceiling, and flexible internals. Those forms allow teachers and students to look at the sky and the mountains at any time, and they blur the boundary between architecture and the natural. From a function point of view, also different size and wall or varying shapes also introduce natural light into the rooms and realize natural ventilation, which can cool down the perennially hot building. And here is our perspective view for the site. And
in the beginning, our design concept came from the transformed toned chair, because chairs and tables are for elementary schools. Our design language will be more exciting and bolder. We designed and developed our current architectural shape from the shape and the concept of the chair. Unified and clear architectural language can enhance people's first impression of this school and improve integrity and the harmony of the design. Therefore, when designing, we use the natural and the organic design language throughout the entire process. The design of our classrooms integrates synthetic materials with a range of nature materials. The curved wall forms and the textures applied to them, including birch bark, create the qualities of natural terrain and plant growth. The mirroring walls and the floors surrounding each classroom become a landscape that extends throughout the site, allowing nature elements to be introduced into the indoor space. This creates the possibility for sunlight, air, and the plants in the nature environment to enter the indoor space.
And we use different architectural shapes and coherent design language as a large prototype to create different microclimates according to this form. And the interlocking of classroom clusters defines a spatial sequence for students and teachers to discover various aspects of the architecture and the site over time. And finally, we apply this design to the entire site, including our meandering circulation paths and other detailed techniques. And the linear wall elements create distinctions between the classroom clusters, and continuity and integrity of the space in the overall structure and the more detailed spatial design. The role of the line in this project shifts radically, producing twisted and woven walls, as well as mesh-like roof structures. And this creates an impression of lines becoming surfaces. So our pedagogical precision is to create small learning environments in the school where student reflects on the relationship between people and nature. And we hope that through this design, people can have more insight of the preciousness of the nature environment.
The outdoors. I'm going to move the speaker. It's going to be muted for 1 second. I'm going to move the speaker.
You want to play?
Maybe, but not full screen, so they, because when it was full screen, it gets hidden. Maybe zoom in so it's framed on this side of this, like a little bit closer. So you can sort of, yeah.
One thing I'm starting to notice on your guys' project is your, like, from your chairs, like you're building this fibrous quality. Actually taught us to go to Florence, like all on like weaving fibers. Okay. But I think that I think you guys have a lot of languages kind of clashing together.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's about picking one, but maybe kind of figuring out the transitions between them and like what kind of programs and spaces are kind of lending itself, because you kind of have like these massive, like the birch wood texture spaces, which are kind of like a mass, and then you have these really open fibrous kind of spaces. And I'm wondering how you can start to like maybe peel that mass away into the fiber structures, or maybe, you know, it starts to embed itself into the surface of those. So I think it's just like about choreographing those interactions between the different languages, and like maybe not have like a geometric floor just because it's like a little distracting and there's like a lot happening. So I think just maybe like choreographing a little bit more like the materialities, like the languages between things will really help this project become a lot more clear.
Yeah, I agree. I think to John's point, even taking that beyond just sort of getting your material language together a bit more, I think maybe starting to think about how the masses that you have sort of along your site actually start to relate with one another a bit more. I think right now they're all kind of doing their own thing separately on the site, and I'd love to see a bit more like integration. You know, whether that's some sort of canopy, sort of connecting volumes, or you know, the sort of fibrous material starting to reach out and sort of wrap around other volumes to make some more connections across the site would help. Yeah. Also, I think the sort of animation, I like the sort of intention behind it. I do feel like you guys are moving really quickly with everything, like you're zooming out really quickly, you're panning really quickly. I think maybe taking a bit more time in the sort of transitions would be helpful, just so we can get more of a sense for your project overall.
Like that piece is really nice.
Yeah.
Right there. Can you go back a little bit?
Yes, the same structure here, whatever
Like that piece
is,
right
yeah.
there is really nice, like that gradation between like the solid and the porous. I
Right.
think that's really successful.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think there's definitely like you've got like too many like materials. Like maybe decide like you're either going to stick to the wood and metal or go like the sort of graphic route, but I don't think the graphic like flooring is helping you guys at all.
Maybe there's a way to use the materials and the textures to like start to delineate the different types of either grade levels or programs happening throughout, because we've seen some that just apply like the same color palette and material all over. And there was like one moment where you had this like really kind of like whitewashed room with like the birch wall and the geometric pattern. And you went to another one that was like candy cane floor. I don't know, there was some like weird like layering thing that happened between switching drastically between those two. I think it would like help me it would help me get into the whole project a bit more if like there was some specificity on like why the materials were where they were, as opposed to just kind of like, you know, haphazardly.
Do you guys want to?
If I can add a comment, I agree with many of the comments that's been said. When I first saw the project as only a roof plan, I was very excited. As I was learning about the project in elevation, I was still really pretty much on board. But it is when I entered the building, I started to become a bit less excited. And why would I be less excited in relation to, you know, the roof plan and so forth? Because in the roof plan, I was reading it as though this is an oversized version of Casa das Canoas from Oscar Niemeyer. Once again, using a Brazilian reference. The thing about Casa das Canoas is that the canopy that overhangs as a kind of, I guess, envelop another figure that's underneath it, it allows for several envelopes to be articulated with several curves, and the transition of materiality between inside and outside is also a very complex yet simple set of moves. What I'm trying to say is perhaps you can think about, well, have a look at Casa das Canoas first of all, and second of all, perhaps consider making this less complicated. I don't understand why you need to I mean, I understand you have a lot of energy and a lot of talent, and of course you want to exercise it, but I feel like, you know, some degree of editing might be more helpful here.
I'd like to ask a question that maybe is a question to your group, but perhaps it's more to everybody kind of in the studio, because it's very fascinating how all of the objects form the school. And I think you're putting a lot of like interesting ideas into education and into new forms of occupation, of like furniture occupation, studying, etc. And that's pretty amazing. So we can understand that buildings can take on any form, and those forms will produce new types of pedagogies or new types of communities. But then when we look at the site plan, there's always the kind of like sports fields that are taking up so much space right on the site. And somehow we are so polite with sports. And the sports are so militaristic, and there's always this idea of like charging and like bringing kids into an educational complex that is all about war and military, and so opposed to some of the forms and some of the ideas that you're presenting about informality, about kind of like hide and seek dynamics, about collaboration and community. I'm just curious whether or not there is a possibility, as you keep growing and scaling out through the powers of 10, if maybe somehow we can also subvert some of these landscapes that are surrounding in terms of also athletics, like rethink and reimagine a non-militaristic approach to physical education and to like different social norms that come out of the architecture and spill out into the landscape a bit more. But it would mean like parkour and, you know, like sports that are about to become Olympic sports, but maybe not the American kind of canon. And somehow I think that would allow for the landscape to soften a little bit as well, to kind of like take on like a finer grain at the level of surface, so that the building can actually have a ripple effect. So that's just
maybe it's a more general comment, but I'd love to see that because I find that figure in the center so kind of obnoxious right now that we're so polite to it, and yet we're kind of like seeing all these amazing
I
possibilities.
love that idea because also in your project, the whole idea is that you want to integrate like teaching the students about the environment and how to care and protect the environment. So maybe this
There should be scuba diving tank. Instead of
yeah, maybe you start growing. It's like maybe
growing
you start into a
algae.
community garden.
Yeah.
And you're actually cultivating and working.
More touching with the natural, and I think we have too much elements is because we are thinking with elementary school is for the kids. Kids will feel boring if we only have like few elements in there. So that's why we try to make it flexible.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our next student presenting is over there, Corey. Corey, what do you would you like that somebody from over here navigate for you, or you want to share screen? What you prefer?
No, they can present. I'm sorry, they can yeah, they can present. They can whoever's doing
Somebody
it
in my
can
group help navigate Corey's project.
yes. First, you're gonna start out at the
And
chair
Trey
design.
is your representative.
I got you.
Yeah. All right. First, you're gonna start out at the chair before we get to the video. And I just want to give a heads up on the video. Sorry for the quality. I'm having a little software problems, but this is what it spat out. So we're gonna work with it. Yeah. So as far as our first part of this project with the chairs, the tonneau design, I wanted to go with something sleek, modern, and futuristic. With the design of the chairs. So instead of loops and curves, I went with more orthogonal lines that are continuous throughout the concept of the chair. The lines never end, and so you can trace them around. They just kind of loop, they connect and loop continuously throughout the chair's design. I went with that more sleek way, more futuristic look to the tonneau design. So now we can go to the video. Try to get through this really quick with you guys. So I decided to go with a more futuristic sci-fi concept to complement my chair design. So using a circuit board as a reference to create circulation in other designated areas. This also gave me the opportunities to play with different levels of occupiable spaces, while also giving these spaces a sense of purpose and hierarchy. I designated the top levels for playing, and the mid levels for circulation, and the lower levels are classrooms and other programs. The theme to my campus is learn while playing, as you can see. So I began to play with materials, transparency, and illumination while using the data transfer of the lines on the circuit board as trim for circulation and connectors to the continuing lines of the chairs. I wanted the school to give a STEM or tech vibe, so I also wanted to create fun ways to circulate around the campus by designing slides, trampolines, ladders, and elevators. A fun and whimsical approach was implemented while focusing on the design and materials while staying true to the circuit board concept. And on my final campus design, I know I wanted to work in a plan and section. I wanted to work inside plan and section, so I tried to shift spaces up and down, adding more levels and spaces vertically. I changed the materiality to complement the desert environment while keeping the circuit board concepts and circulation and lighting throughout the campus, using these constrictions lightly to match with the design concept of the neighboring school's design and circulation. I used terrazzo, stucco, and glass, applying contrasting colors and textures to play along with the environment. This is also how I came up with the ceilings to complement and organically mimic the Southern California mountains around it. And that's pretty much my project there.
We have your model here also.
Cool.
Corey, do you play video games?
Well, as much as I love to, and I have them, I don't have the time to do to play them.
It seems as if you've designed your campus almost like a video game. The navigation, the way, even the style of your animation is kind of like a reel of a video game. You have a lot of stacking in plan. I would say that you need to really work more three-dimensionally to kind of interrupt some of those the flatness that you have going on in the kind of sheets or like the strut. This is why it reads a lot like a video game because of all the levels and the way that you would move between 0.0 to like maybe 0.3. But the other thing I noticed is also the terrazzo is like complete juxtaposition, like opposite of any other aesthetic that you have going on there. But there's something about it that makes it feel more friendly and more childlike. So that's interesting.
Exactly what I wanted to
The change in scale throws me off though. The change in scale in the terrazzo, it feels wrong.
Yeah,
but it
the,
could
I mean,
also
these
go back
stones
to
are like, or they're like, you know, that's big. Like the mini class, the bathroom size, no?
I'm sorry.
Maybe that some rocks are like bathroom size.
Yeah, so the terrazzo.
The scale of this terrazzo, that is like it's too off. All right. Marcin is talking about this. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I enlarged it purposely to differentiate the different types of circulation there. So main circulation and secondary circulation is on the terrazzo.
Maybe if they become rocks, if they become 3D, like you climb on them, you know, parts of the playground that you climb on them, you know.
Yes.
That's
Correct. I think the comment about the size of the terrazzo is pretty important. The work, I don't know if you've been looking at the work of Max Lamb. Max Lamb is an English industrial designer. He works with a terrazzo fabricator also in London called Jack, where they're able to achieve incredibly large sized terrazzo into the aggregate, and it's not easy nor cheap, right? But I wonder though, the scalability of this idea that you do some parts of it is naturally terrazzo. But then lamb is just the animal that humans eat. But the oversized terrazzo, I wonder if you can achieve it through other means, because I do like the idea that these are students navigate themselves.
Menace, can you say the last sentence one more time?
Yeah, please.
You said, I like the idea that these are
oversized graphic cues for students to navigate themselves.
I think to Jimenez's point, something I found interesting was your use of a motherboard graphic or the sort of circuitry in the floor. I think there's one moment in your animation where we see it at one scale and then it jumps to a bigger scale in a swimming pool. I think that's something that's like actually a graphic that you might be able to produce more sort of cost effectively or more realistically at such a large scale. And so maybe incorporating that a bit more or using another kind of graphic rather than a sort of material that has like a known scale.
Okay, understandable. Yeah.
Another thing I wanted to ask you is the sort of white line that you have going on, and all of it, yeah. Oh, it's red.
It's moved to, yeah, that's a earlier.
Okay, great. I
now
was
it's
going
red.
to say I think it needs to be a color of
Yeah.
some kind, but perfect. Cool.
You did it, it's a color already, yeah. So these are the new renders.
I'm sitting here looking at your interior model diorama, and there's something really interesting in the way you're treating the ceiling of like you're making the ceiling like the sky texture, and then you have windows, which I find kind of interesting. Like you kind of have all of these like man-made materials on the outside, and then kind of like the mimicking of nature on the inside.
Mhm.
I think that could be a really interesting concept to explore, because like looking at like your roof plan, you kind of, most people kind of are incorporating nature and stuff like that, and you're really not doing that. But maybe you're kind of doing the opposite of that. You're kind of pushing all of the unnatural things outside and bringing like the natural elements on the inside. So you're kind of like mimicking
Mhm.
like these environments on the inside of the building, which I think could be really interesting. It gives me like the sky, especially the ceiling, gives me like very like Virgil Abloh kind of vibes. So
Mhm.
I
Okay.
think that could be worth exploring a little bit more.
Okay. Noted on that. Thank you.
You can see that in this, something nice also, Corey. In this photo, you have the image terrazzo, and then you have the rocks. I would study that more, like it's an infill and it's a kind of, like, what are these materials? Remember that we talked before about materials? In order to move on from that to what you were talking about, Corey had an idea, like if for me it was too much video game, Tron, and to find new materialities. So he went to his neighborhood to find material. So, like in that search, I think they need to start to hybridize. So terrazzo as a fake and also as a natural, like I think the model is nice when it's doing that. It's like an actual rock with like that. And then what if you start to get what Sean was saying about the ceiling, the clouds? Maybe you get the lamps are more like, Frank Gehry has these paper lamps that are like cloud shaped. So made out of just paper, white paper. So, I think this kind of 2D to 3D, it will help you to also what Mashida was saying about the stacking problem that the project has in 3D, which is an extrusion problem, and so some of these objects might be more three-dimensional. The ceiling, the rocks.
I think building on that too, Florencia, like Corey, jump I was having a hard time following is your chair to I think maybe like the classroom scale, that 20, like what 20 feet or something, because they're all rectilinear and they're just like, so it's what we would kind of expect, I think, in regular classrooms. I get you're doing like a lot with the roof and the ceilings and stuff, and I think that's going in a good direction. But there's something much more playful and kind of like unbalanced about the chair that it's hard to understand how it like quite works. And then at the classroom scale, I think that's where I'm having a hard time. I think that those could be way more playful, actually. Now, I was asking for more pragmatic things in the last few reviews, but this one's like way too straightforward as far as the shape of and then I think that translates to the overall site plan as well, because then I just see these buildings that are just kind of like aligned on one side and just kind of plopped, and they're not really like layered or integrated in any kind of way. They're just all following the exact same grid even. I think maybe only the scale difference in the circulation shifts off that grid, but everything else is on this kind of exact same grid. Very rudimentary, both in the classroom scale at that level and then also at the site plan scale.
Notice something really important in the chair, because in the chair, the structural lines don't coincide in terms of the seat and the leg. And so if we take the seat to the leg proportionally to the building scale, it would mean that the roof shouldn't coincide with the floor plan of the walls. So the roof should be either too small or too large, and somehow that gap in the chair would translate into a gap between the floating surface and the surface of support. And I was actually thinking of the Walt Disney Concert Hall's interior, where you can sense the gap, like quite literally, between the external walls and the kind of like body of the boat that you occupy when you're sitting inside. I would imagine that exactly as you're noticing, that shift could happen like really kind of beautifully into the architectural grid. We just don't see it quite yet. So Corey, if you can like take your chair and scale it up quite literally as a kind of structural
diagram for how the roof meets or does not meet the walls. You get that gap where the ladder is coming up, but that would be a much more three-dimensional gap. And you have to produce this kind of like labyrinthian logic in section.
Okay.
We're just looking at the one classroom that's that we're looking at right now on the left, with the sky treatment in the ceiling. And I think there's something really powerful about what you're doing with these kind of images of what might be considered to be nature or the natural on the site. And so I just want to second that whole discussion about the large scale terrazzo. I think really, and the more I look at your physical model and the way you place stones in there, I think that play upon when is something an image and when is something producing new objects or artifacts in the space could really tie into your ideas about education and technology that you spoke about. I also thought your statement was really clear, and it was, it really helped guide me through your project. And I think it was really very well articulated.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you, Corey. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
And we're moving to our next group. I don't know if people need a small break. Otherwise, we can do a 5-minute break.
That's good.
Let's do a 5-minute break and then we'll continue. So for our guests out there, we're going to take a 5-minute break. It's 12:13. We're back at 12:20. No? I know that's like more of a 7-minute 7-minute break. 12:20. See you back here. Thank you so much for joining. Hi, Nato. How you doing? Good. How are you? Hey. Actually needed. We're back.
And get it in kind of like this and then pause. Like mix.
So our next group is Fishe and Arjun. Yes.
Are you guys ready? So we have, this is one, so we do two more.
Yes.
Okay, so we should be on time. The thing is, if you do full screen, it covers part of it, but
You can make that if it's smaller. I don't know, but you're going to, yeah.
or you can zoom in on that.
Yeah, you can zoom in
the
on
left
that.
side. And just please remember to speak loudly so everybody can, we have the microphone, but it's, and also so we can hear.
So the general design scheme for our school comes from the organic deformation that we chose for our chairs. So we have abstracted the two basic forms of lines and surfaces from the chair and try to show its natural representation. So the lines don't just follow the surfaces that you see in a chair, but here it even evolves into the design elements and even helps define the surfaces, which in turn gives the volumes for the spaces. So the general layout of a school is an exaggerated form of an organic pigmentation that you would see in any in a natural element, and try to show try to show how each line and the surfaces would contrast and complement each other in different elements.
So for the design of the classroom, since we made a chair really based on the like really natural curve, we are targeting.
Yeah. Not this way, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Don't look at the wall. You know, the wall can want to here.
Okay. So let me just start it again. So for our design of the classroom, because we made we made a chair like really based on the really natural curve, and so we want to try to keep the the natural curvature shape. So also on the interior space of design the building. So we want to have the sense of growing elements in our design. So those curves from the chair, they keep growing and create this an interior pavilion. So you can see on the second one right here. So kind of created an interior pavilion of their space. And for the building, and it start to imagine this curve keep expanding their shape and for building and create a really nice shading on the top between two buildings. And just a natural tree, start to give a shadow for people on the bottom side of the space.
So coming from the Tonnet chair that we had started, we have kept the basic curves for some shading, and then even try to evolve them into other organic forms that that sometimes just try taking over the volumes. So they don't. So it's not the curves. The surfaces are done first, and the lines just try to take its shape and try to show how the how the forms trying to interact with each other. So we have gone along, so instead of making the whole site flat, we try to go along the natural contours that you would see in the site and try to use those levels in demarcating different parts of the school. So we have majorly two clusters that you'd see the early, the cluster here is for the early school, and this is the elementary school cluster. And in the middle, we would find the common facilities like administration, and we would have childcare, and we would have even the faculty rooms. Then flanking it would be the things would be like the art pavilion and the amphitheaters. So you can describe the classrooms.
All right.
So yeah.
we try to make sure that the design somewhat stems out from the existing school, so it feels like it's just growing and evolving away from it.
Do you want to replay the animation?
Yeah.
Can you hand me your chair model, the one on the left?
I think your presentation is super thorough, and the animations are great, but I think for me, the site right now, the sort of formal qualities you guys have developed feel really heavy-handed compared to the actual chairs that you designed. Like, I wonder why that sort of like page-like structure is as thick as it is. Like, I feel like there's like something really delicate about this chair in particular, and sort of how this like kind of like tree structure is like the seat to the back of the chair and the legs and so on. And I wonder if you could bring back maybe some of that like some more sort of like lighter elements to it. I even think maybe some of the materials you've chosen are a bit intense. Like, it all just feels kind of really dark and like heavy, like maybe pulling from, again, this same chair, like colors that are a bit brighter, a bit softer, and even starting to use the same kind of armature language to incorporate like things like a bookshelf or things like storage, right? Like in that one rendering you have towards the bottom right there, where the bookshelf is like this sort of curved shape, but it's so far removed from the wall, like that kind of feels like lost space. Like, could you maybe start to think about how, the storage systems become these sort of like blob forms or sort of these like more organic shapes that are more three-dimensional but are attached to the wall through that same kind of system, like I think there's something really beautiful here that we kind of lose when you jump in scale and start to work on this site.
There are some moments that we see there that gives me kind of like prehistoric and also animal carcass.
Kind of Jurassic Park.
Yeah. But if you were to play more on that, instead of reintroducing either the more like parametric types or like swirl, that I don't really feel that swirl is necessary in their style of design. And just like Nancy was saying, the patterns on the floor and some of like the color palette you have is a bit intense, but you do have really nice forms originating from both of these chairs. That one feels as if, it's kind of like the wild pig, and then this is once it starts to decay and kind of reveal some of its bones. And you have a lot of that language in the plan. You might need to lose control in some more places, I think, in order to gain some of that back. And you have like the little popcorn structure. It almost feels like it's a food design almost, like when you would like I don't know what thing, like white chocolate or
like icing or something. Yeah. I mean, even the way those like blue glass domes are fitting on top of it feels very like candy cake, like yeah.
Yeah, I would say like your guys one of the only chairs that I've seen that actually incorporates like really massive, like substantial pieces that aren't like, like wire, like a bistro chair or something like that. So I think that you guys should play up like the play between this mass and like these tendrils a little bit more. Like, I don't know like what these would be, if they're kind of like circulation or if they're that kind of scale, or if they're more like a structural scale.
More of how the nature like reclaims on, so it just grows over the surfaces.
Right. Yeah. So, like I think when you go there, like I think you kind of reverse it almost a little bit in this. Like you kind of like the tendrils have become the massive part rather than like the carved beneath it. And it's kind of getting into like Voronoi land. I would be careful with that.
Okay.
You don't want it to go like algorithmic on you, but yeah, I think just like playing with this relationship a little bit more will really help you guys.
This chair though, is it all the same color?
So we're not getting material yet. So
Right.
actually that's really fun to kind of look at that and speculate that that thing just got a little thicker and it just became the mass all of a sudden. But when it gets to that, just like the site plan, every different entity is treated with a different color material. So I don't know, we talked about material a lot today, and I know it's probably one of the later things that you got to, so I don't want to harp on it too much, but when you go forward with the materials, starting to blend the surfaces a bit more, I'm sorry, Marcel was talking about you were saying where the building stops and the landscape begins, or kind of understanding that, delineating that, theorizing on that exactly. I think that's why this is more successful actually than the rendering of it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think stick to like a color palette or a material palette. I feel like you have a lot of stuff that's this blue gray tone, and then there's the elementary school rooms that are a popcorn kind of brown neutral tones that feel like they don't really want to be together. I don't know, maybe it's a question of changing the shades or something, but I think maybe trying to make those feel like they belong to the same type of project.
Am I zooming out a little bit? I think also one of the most successful places, down on the left, you kind of have these classrooms. Sorry, on the site, if you go to the roof plan or the site plan, yeah, those classrooms or whatever they are on the left, on the bottom left, it kind of looks like you took rocks kind of like this and tied them up. Yeah, which I think is working pretty well. I think it works better than the other forms that are kind of this exoskeleton. But I think that could be really interesting how you start to talk about the cluster of program and how you start to tie maybe unlike things together, or I don't know. But I think that's one of the most successful areas down there.
I liked, I agree with the comments, and I liked especially when Natu was speaking about the kind of built-in furniture, actually taking the thickness of the spine people spoke about it, taking the thickness of the model and incorporating it into the architectural kind of wall section. I keep looking at the site plan. It seems to me like you have multiple projects in one plan. Sometimes it's kind of on purpose, right? We can see in the studio in particular, a lot of ideas kind of juxtaposed in a very playful way on purpose. But I think in your case, you could edit some of these things out a little bit and think about integrating ideas into walls, or kind of taking things from one moment in scale and bringing them into a different moment in scale, so that there's a little bit more continuity. Because I'm a little bit worried about the site plan becoming almost like Disneyland, where each part has its own geometric, but also material and color palette. Everything changes from one space to the next. And so then you get these very distinct areas where, oh, I'm going to go to this zone, or I'm going to go to that. You want a little bit more continuity, even as you're shifting scales or shifting age groups, so that some things remain consistent throughout the site plan to hold it all together. Otherwise, it becomes a little bit kind of kitsch, almost like we're kind of shifting into different territory, I would say.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, so we have 2 more projects to go. Piyush. Oops, oops, oops. Everybody's good over there on our Zoom.
Hello everyone, good afternoon. So taking in reshaping the classic toned chairs,
Yeah, speak up to the
Reshaping the classic tonnet chairs. The concept for my project is a ripple fold drapery kind of a thing. If you look at the image here, these ones are like coming down like a drape. So I start with the video first. The pleating in the fabric is achieved through the spacing. Modern in appearance, the rippled folds or draperies have this advantage over the other styles. Like I've designed 3 types of classrooms in this in different scales. It's a huge class, and it has different according to the different grades and materials. Like for the structures, I've used recyclable polypropylene and translucent fabric with different shades of yellow. This is the translucent on the center of the structure, and so I've designed the structures. It's as during the summer months in Southern California, it's very hot, so the sun can be intense, right? So from the north, the structures are like a shell. It's ripple fold draping, or like it's with the flow of the landscape. It merges around the structure, wrapping up the whole landscape. These are the extruding decks on the north side, which is cantilevered, and this is the amphitheater on the south side going on the hills. So it's like the pathways lead up the volumes between the structures. These are the pathways, and between the pathways there is landscape, lush green landscape in between those. The color yellow because it creates a positive feeling for the students. Go inside.
I really love how you articulated the edges of your setting. The fact that we'll talk, I'm sure, more about the kind of objects themselves, but the edges, especially the rippling edge along the main kind of highway or road, whatever that stretch is.
Yeah.
It feels like you're dealing with landscape as though it were truly like a kind of formal geometric edge, and that cantilever, it's really beautiful. So there's something about just the way in which you're pulling the whole site together is really fantastic. I mean, I think the groundscape it's the thing that I was missing from the previous project. I was kind of trying to understand how do you kind of form this whole thing into something almost like taking clay and forming it. And I think you've done a beautiful job, especially with those groundscapes. And in a sense, it's a very organic project as you described it, but it holds its shape so tightly, and it has a relationship to some of the other parts of the master plan, which is really, really beautiful.
Kind of like reminded me like a plate of croissants or something. It looks like a pastries or something like that. But I think when you're talking about this kind of like draping, if you go back to the video, like towards the end of the video, I think like when you think about draping, you're draping over something.
Yeah.
And I'm not really getting that from this. Okay. I'm kind of seeing like the layering and kind of like the shingling of fabric.
Okay.
Yeah, like pleats. So I'm not getting that draping concept. I think where it's probably most successful is like that ring with like the gray in the middle of it. Like that outside form is really nice. It's kind of looking like an Olympic park a little bit. Like they all kind of look like arenas. I'm wondering like how the classroom is starting to come into there.
Because of symmetry.
Yeah, the symmetry issue is starting to work a little bit against you there.
Okay.
So I would just think about like how you can start to use that draping in a little more of a loose kind of way, and rather than trying to force it into submission.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it, like to John's point, and also to honest, the sort of like really loose edge that you've developed, I think needs to find its way back in sort of the volumes that you're working with. Like they all are, they do kind of feel like sort of like bonbons like insular. I wonder if they can start to maybe like drape around each other or like into each other. You know, maybe there's a sort of like drape, a sort of canopy or something that drapes between volumes, things like that. They do feel like really separate across the site, but I do think like the way you organized everything is super clear, really successful. I also love the sort of color palette of the whole thing. Yeah.
I just want to maybe make a quick comment. I think the croissant mentioned. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear.
Yeah.
The mention of the croissant, I feel like probably shouldn't be taken so lightly, because I think it is interesting to think about the Mariah's exercise of tracing along the centroid of the croissant and performing a kind of serial cut. Because I think spatially there's probably something really amazing if you were to create a series of cross sections, and perhaps even a kind of unrolled longitudinal section that's maybe that would be sort of an elaboration on Mariah's exercise at the croissant. And I think for Mariah's, he was performing this exercise on singular croissants, right? But here, once you have an archipelago of croissants, I think it might be super interesting to then think about what kind of let's say symphony of serial cuts can one make in order to understand these spaces. And I think in terms of the material thickness of whatever it is that you're trying to produce here in the cross section, notes that something like a croissant has a inconsistent thickness due to the way that the pastry itself puffs. But in your case, I can totally imagine that maybe the materiality of this vault-ish structure, whatever that material is, or however you conceive of the structural system, and perhaps even the other kinds of nooks and crannies and gaps that you embed into the wall system, there could be a programmatic opportunity if you were to think of the unevenness of the thickness when you do these kinds of again symphony of serial cuts.
Thank you.
Do you know the Miraya's croissant drawings?
I have not seen that.
So you'll look it up. As
I put it in the chat. I put it there.
Oh, good. Yes.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, because those are amazing. I would also agree with the way in which you're creating.
Maybe you can zoom into the one that's video.
The way in which you're working on like creating this new landscape for your campus that is, maybe that edge, thinking about how you want to address the edge near the field and also the edge as it meets Diamond Ranch High School. But I love the sort of undulating kind of walls that, and thinking back to John Enright's discussion of the balanced site, like the way in which cut and fill could work, I think you could develop a whole idea about that in terms of how you're sort of supporting and balancing this on the site.
Would say also like the materiality, especially like on the interior, there's something very like fantasy, like fairy about it. I don't know why. Maybe it's just the materiality and like the lighting, but that might be something you could play up a little bit more. I mean, if
Draping, you see it's draping, it's almost a silver.
yeah, and like in the floor, like that looks really nice. So I think that maybe you could, take it there. Because I mean, it is an elementary school. It can be playful. And what is that kind of bringing? Like, what is the nature bringing into that kind of narrative?
Yeah.
I wonder whether on the color issue, the contrast to the croissant yellow pastry and the fact that the landscape is not so green. I keep on always going like, this is not a golf course or turf or something. Like very little rain and a lot of stones. I think it would be wonderful if this, instead of being so green, you make it more dry, more, sandy. And so it's all kind of sandy. And then the green, or maybe, some plants that have some color, even the flowers you use in blue, they are certain accents. But I think the green against the sandy kind of brown color, I think you need to regulate a bit more. It's too contrasting for me, and it makes it too artificial, which is okay, but I will leave these guys and the forms to be artificial and the landscape maybe more natural, like more contrast. I mean, following Anna's point, the edge is off from there. These are infill. So it's actually, Sean was saying that nothing grows really well there because it's the earth that has been flipped. So somehow its constitution is not that good, and also not enough water, public building. And so this is so dry, and the whole site is so dry. So I think how you blend that.
Maybe like a red rock.
Yeah.
I'm thinking red rock only because of, again, that football field, but it's a very strong figure and the kind of figure against the ground that's offset and plays with the geometric offset a little bit. It could help.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Piyush. Thank you so much. We have our final team. Right, Piyush.
The whole review, or you still have the afternoon?
No, we're morning because there were 3 reviews happening at the same time.
Good.
So we run them in parallel. Okay, it's a little bit.
Wait, is that slime or is that
Fine. I'm going to put the mod up
It should
there.
be sugar. It should be sugar. Final.
It's like a slime.
Oh my God, that's so good.
Okay, so final project.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Marpeja, Claire, and we're gonna present your project. We're gonna start with our chairs first.
So our chairs, we realized that we use similar chairs. So the original concept came from the Tonet chair, and then we kind of had our own interpretation of that. And we each kind of created different forms. So I ended up creating kind of the more curled forms, and Marpeja ended up doing more the inflated. And so we kind of took that initial concept and realized that we could, in a way, merge them. So in this case, we created a similar materiality in terms of the moss, the clover, and then which ended up being kind of more of a harder candy, almost like a slime, which then transitioned into our project. So, yeah. So with the classroom, we kind of envisioned a narrative of a science experiment gone wrong, which is why you see the slime, and you'll see a tipped over beaker as well. And what happens then is the surroundings, the classroom has kind of been warped. And so it warps not only the environment around the classroom, but also some of the objects within. And so we used the same concept from our chairs, that curved, warped, inflatable, to kind of create that into our classroom. And then eventually we get into the cluster of classrooms, kind of looking at how we can transition it not just from one classroom, but then into multiples. So we went ahead and introduced a diagrid pattern to contrast kind of more of the formless objects that we have and sort of bring a little bit more order to our project. And then we also began to look at the site and transition our classrooms to be a little bit more indoor-outdoor, mostly because we considered that with this being California, the weather, we could realistically go ahead and have it open most of the year. So we went ahead and considered the materiality of the desert as well, and kind of introduced that more into the second part of our project. And then once we go into the overall layouts, we continue to consider and engage with the landscape. We shifted the forms into the typography of the site. And then rather than completely rejecting the existing Morphosis building, we wanted to kind of create a slight transition. So as you move further away from the Morphosis project, then it begins to transition more into our design concept.
We can see the different materials. We have sand, stone, and some like patchy grass blobs. And they are really like in tune with the California like landscape. They also define the programs of the school. So we have that the plastic is all of the playground and like kids can like interact with all of it, but also like the patchy grass and the stone, they are interactive so that the kids go up and interact with like the whole classroom and the building itself. For the building, as Claire mentioned, we didn't want to reject the Morphosis building and instead like create this gradient pattern that starts with their existing building, and then you can see it like the grid starts deforming, and then like this sort of cloth starts deforming as well and like inflating and just playing with the form that creates our classrooms. And
yeah. And one other thing as well is we didn't want to create kind of more of a set, rigid circulation. So a lot of it is open, and many of the blobs can be interacted with, it can be climbed over. So what will end up happening is as the kids start to use the space, that circulation will begin to happen naturally.
Yeah, also as we have like the science class, we also have like art class and the gardening class. So all of this landscape here is part of the gardening class that will be one of in the project. All of them kind of, we wanted to have like a different kind of like school, and not with like regular classrooms with like design for certain things, but more like, you know, different kind of classes. And like the science lab is one of the most important ones, but also the arts and the gardening, and also we have like cooking and like all sorts of different classrooms being in our project. Thanks.
I love your material palettes, the chairs, the classroom interiors. I'm a little disappointed by the site plan. It's like way, like there's so much like happening in all of this stuff, and then your site plan is so safe and like very regular. I mean, you're talking about a sort of free circulation, but the way you've organized it, people are just going to walk in like straight lines or kind of, you know, I don't know. I think you can definitely kind of push the way you guys are interacting with the topography with the site, and even the sort of continuation, right? I understand wanting to like blend the Morphosis building into your project, but even with those sort of longer rectangular rooms that you have, or those rectangular volumes, maybe that last one on the end, like, is at a bit of an angle, right? Kind of like the fallen beaker in your animation, like that's what it opens with. Like maybe that's kind of the moment where it tips off from the sort of like axis, and then the rest of it is the kind of spill, right? Yeah.
I do think that they're missing programs, you know?
Yeah.
More like some stuff are not there.
Right.
So
Right.
definitely as a program, they lined up,
Right.
you know, the shifting, interesting, and taking over those buildings as well. So how you start to gradient that?
I think the approach of like trying to blend the Morphosis building like by kind of repeating the same form is not a bad one, but I think that you can do this with it. what if it's like you like sort of dropping slime and it's like it starts rolling down the hill and like it starts to you're kind of like melting away the existing like logic of that building that already exists there. And I think that you can start to incorporate that as like an edge condition into the rest of the site plan, which I think would tie back into like your classroom idea. Like I really love how like that slime was so heavy, it just like made the table.
Yes.
You know, like that, like just physics. So it's just creating it for you and you just kind of like allow it to happen. And I think that you can approach the site plan the same way. Like you can start to like take these forms and start to, you know, drop slime on them or whatever and just let them exist as they are. You know, like try not to let them be too perfect. Which I think is what's going on.
Sorry, John.
No, you're good.
Because something about that to me kind of insinuates that blob is wrapper instead of blob becoming the actual mass. And I think it's really interesting when you start to get like the thickened blob that you can kind of carve out and create space in there. So I would even suggest for you to push that even further, then it becomes less of like a drape and more of like a formal issue of the actual box melting and kind of creasing and creating other mass on the site. Yeah.
Like the build up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Would you toss the black diamond kind of as a described diagram? Because that's a complete opposite of the like block rendering. I actually really like the image where you showed them like layering and overlapping. Those really beautiful material effects that you worked on with this kind of like pinkish, shiny kind of hue. I thought it was actually really, really beautiful. Those are complete opposite types of things. Very, very opposite. But somehow they blend so well. I think there's a lot that can be done just in that like project right there. It maybe translates a little bit more to the site where it's not like these buildings just like plopped on, but it is much more kind of like layered, integrated type of thing.
Yeah, Genoyo on the Zoom world put some image there as a reference to that volume, no, Eric?
If you
go to the chat,
you see kind of use it as like they're just kind of gonna go wherever. I think maybe
that is sick. Yeah.
Yeah, do something like that. Maybe it's not so much. Maybe it's more of like a cage that the stuff
put it in
coming out of than like using down. You know what I mean? And that's great. What artist is
Pretty
that?
nasty. Who is that?
Very.
I love this. This is
Yeah.
great. Okay.
You're muted, Eric.
Jason Hopkins.
Jason Hopkins. Got it. Thank you.
2010.
The
biostructure.
It's like the slime is also responding to the grid.
Right.
It's not just, it's just not behaving nice, it's not over layering, but it's actually moving itself like based on the grid as well. Piercing.
There's also, if you go back to your chairs and zoom in, right there, yeah, exactly where your hand is. I love the way that you start to kind of almost bump, I just want to see them touching. And so the inflated, really, and then the dialogue between the thin tubular line and the one that becomes almost pod-like. And I could imagine your building masses starting to pick up on some of that. So rather than being boxy with like the drape curtain, maybe they actually start to have some of that dynamic. And they're almost like touching up against each other. And then maybe you can walk through like between them, or as landscape elements start to come in there. I think that'd be really fabulous. Any other comments?
From over there, from this.
Yeah, I think the production quality is quite good for this project. So that I mean, this is maybe some of the other critics have already touched on a lot of the design decisions, which I think are great. But I think it's pretty important to at least highlight that at this stage in the education, the production quality of the rendering the execution is super fantastic. So yeah, worth letting you guys know. Good job.
I think to that point, Jimenez, I think that it's important And that's something for all the students. It's important how you start to own the textures you're working with, like how you discover even things that you might not be able to name. I mean, I don't know that if that becomes a soft chair, it's not just like, um, science experiment metaphor, it's something else. So I think to that, the rendering medium is a way for them to discover things, to become proficient, to say, yes, it's the first semester. This is what, 2 months? 2 months since they started SCI-Arc, and so 2 months of indoctrination to get here. So I think that this is great to use the medium of representation to discover things. And the model, helps you, but it's a kind of feedback. Even though we haven't developed much work in the model, these are just short exercises. But I think the project is great. I mean, I agree with all the comments. As you move on, but this is a jump in the void, Sometimes some projects go faster, some a bit slower to get to the project, but having a half a semester just to do that, we'll get there. Okay, so thank you guys. Thank you so much. Alex, we still have with you over there. Any final comments from our guests? Thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you over there on Zoom. Thank you,
Very good to see you guys.
Thank you.
See you all soon.
And come back.
Yeah,
I'll try. Next time.
Yes, this is the first live review, so sorry for all of the sound, any of the sound issues and so on, but hopefully we'll get you back on for final review.
Great.
Excellent.
Great job, guys.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
That's showrunners without the